Allow me to present the Sega Genesis Flashback with 85 built-in games including Sonic the Hedgehog, Phantasy Star 2, 3, and 4, as well as the Mortal Kombat games on Sega Genesis and Shinobi 3. 85 built-in games, but not all of them are Sega Genesis games. I'll get to that in a moment. This is from AtGames, who has released some questionable Sega Genesis related products in the past. This is my favorite one to date because it includes built-in games, but it also plays real Sega Genesis cartridges via HDMI, and that's something that your NES Classic and SNES Classic won't do. It's hard to not compare this directly to the miniature Nintendos since it looks and attempts to feel like a miniature Sega Genesis. It's just not quite up to the Nintendo level of quality. It's close, but they cut a few corners and it shows. On the whole, I'm pretty impressed with it. This comes with 2 wireless controllers. They're like that Sega Genesis Model 3 controller, so not the best Genesis controllers. Hopefully you have a couple originals because this will also work with your old school wired Sega Genesis controllers. While it comes with a bunch of built-in games, what's most exciting is that it just plays the real ones. Like Crystal's Ponytail. Who's not excited about playing Crystal's Ponytail on the big screen in HD? How about some Truxton? That's a better game. Herzog Zwei, Musha, Revenge of Shinobi. This will play them, and that's its greatest feature. It plays real Sega Genesis games with the real controllers via HDMI, and it's pretty good. Where it drops the ball completely is the menu interface. It's cheap. It just feels cheap, and it doesn't need to. They could just spend a bit more time on the menu interface, like put some music in the background or something. It's just a bit clunky. Doesn't feel nearly as nice as the NES Classic or SNES Classic, but beyond that, it does work. And there's a bunch of Sega Genesis games in here.
Rise from your grave.
Like Altered Beast, which looks and plays well, as you can see. Functionally, this thing works just fine. You plug it in, and it plays games, 85 built-in games, which breaks down to about 63 Sega games, and about half of them are Sega Genesis games. The rest of them are split between Master System and Game Gear. So there's actually a lot of good games in here, including Fantasy Zone, The Maze, and the original Phantasy Star. As well as the Ninja and Sonic Drift 2, so I can't really complain about the game selection, except that for some reason they go out of their way to add 20 just cheap-ass knockoff games that do nothing except give me a reason to complain about it. You could have taken that space and added Truxton, for example. This is the best Sega Genesis plug-and-play game system that I've seen yet, and I love that they included Fantasy Zone, The Maze, and the Ninja, and there's some really good Game Gear games in here. If you're just getting into Sega Genesis collecting, this is a nice choice because it plugs right into your modern LCD TV. It plays original games, so you can go out and get some used games at the game store, and you get about 40 or so Sega Genesis games built into it, Golden Axe 1, 2, and 3. It's got Arrow Flash, which is better than any of the Mario or Zelda games, but this has a hard time competing against the wonderful NES and SNES Classic because Nintendo did such a nice job with those. However, again, I gotta keep coming back to this one point. This plays your original Sega Genesis games. We're going to use the shot of Vectorman rocking out to the beat as my comparison. Here's Vectorman 2, my game cartridge being played on the Sega Genesis Flashback. So just memorize this image here. Looks pretty good. And here's Vectorman 2 being played from within the Sega Genesis Flashback, the version of Vectorman 2 that's built into the Flashback. Now, we're going to step it up to some real blast processing. Vectorman 2 being played on my original Sega Genesis, outputting SCART to a FrameMeister. Yes, it's better, but it also costs about 10 times as much. The original one isn't as bright or oversaturated, so you can see more details in the shadows. Makes a big difference in the dark sections of these games. And you can also adjust the image within the FrameMeister, so it's not really a fair comparison. The AtGames Sega Genesis Flashback is a great value-priced alternative. And I think there's a lot of room for improvement. Sure, it comes with a bunch of built-in games, but its strength is that it plays your existing library of Sega Genesis games or your new and growing library of Sega Genesis games. Classic Game Room has been brought to you by the ultra-massive Video Game Console Guide, 230 pages of video games on Amazon.com, Retro Megatreks, and how to make a video game review show that doesn't suck. And Jesus number 2. Welcome to the Patreon Lord Carnage Club, being shouted from a turbo volcano. Michael and Ariana Nelson, Ian Shore, Steven Chucknick, Al Stever, Rick DeBarros, Jason Goy, Andy Schleiss, Sergio Matthias Hergert, Philip Strabenmuller, Jack Stavris, Ohad Kane, Simon Allen, and Sean Zoltek.